Welcome to the Wall to Wall podcast, brought to you by Wall Ed Tech, where your host, Jared and Kari Wall's passion for technology and learning come together to bring you up-to-date information on what's going on in and out of the classroom. From the latest apps and best practices to current trends, this podcast is Wall to Wall Ed Tech.
Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Wall Ed Tech's Wall to Wall podcast. Today we are on episode 17. The title of today's episode is I Quit, and it's about teacher burnout. So today we're going to discuss, started off with an interesting article that we came across, which led from one thing to another, and it's about analyzing teacher resignation letters. And so we thought we'd share our thoughts on what's happening in the education system and our experiences. This episode is unlike any we've done before, and it is completely unscripted. We have decided to wing it. So we don't have a whole lot in regards to show notes, but you can always check them out. We wanted to just sit down and have an honest conversation about how we feel and our thoughts on what's going on in the classroom, in education in general. So I'm here with Jared.
And I'm happy to be back. This is our first show of the new year. And much like you, if you're feeling overwhelmed, at times we have a lot of work to do. And so this is our first show. We apologize, but we're trying to get back in the swing.
Well, we've wanted to get back in the swing, and we've had a really hard time doing that, which has partly led to this particular episode. And, just like social media and Facebook and all this, you always put your best face forward. No one ever posts that, they're struggling with different things. And so kind of like that with our podcast, we always want to put the best face forward. And so we've had a really hard time finding our best face, I guess you could say, because of teacher burnout and just kind of where we are right now in our professional life. So that's why it's taken us a little bit of time to get started with getting back into the hang of things with the new year.
Another show note we'd like to mention before we start, we do have our Flipgrid where you can leave us feedback. We're going to open a special Flipgrid so that if you want to respond to this episode, specifically the I Quit Teacher Burnout episode, and you want to leave your thoughts about your experiences at your school, whether they're contrary to ours or you want to amen us and leave us some feedback of your own, we promise if you utilize that for feedback for that channel, we will keep you anonymous if you'd like to share your thoughts that we could then use in future episodes. Before we move on to our topic, though, even though there may be some burnout going on with teachers, we thought we'd lighten your load a little with a few technology tools that we've come across this holiday season going into the new year. If you're an English teacher or anyone who grades in Google Docs, CheckMark has updates. I use CheckMark regularly. It's an extension for Chrome. Just go to the Chrome store and look up CheckMark, add it to your Chrome browser, and this has had a fantastic update. It looks great. It saves to your Google Drive, and it has a profile setting where you can tell it what you're grading, and it gives you templates for dropping comments and grades into Google Docs. So if you're an English teacher and you're constantly checking grammar, you can just highlight the section and then choose the little automatic note that says spelling error, check your capitalization. Instead of having to type that, it gives you templates to drop those comments in. That's one. Second, Grammarly, for those of you who are familiar with Grammarly, that checks your spelling and grammar. Usually it's for Windows and Word, but they now have a Chrome extension that will check all of that good stuff in your Google in your Gmail. So before you shoot off an email through Gmail, how fantastic is it to have a program that says, hey, you want to check this right here? Maybe you forgot some punctuation, maybe you didn't capitalize spell, or maybe it's just awkwardly worded. Grammarly's there to help. It'll also, it's beta testing in your Google Docs, so it checks all of that for you as well. Finally, Tab Resize is an extension for Chrome. For those of you who split your screen on a Chromebook or on your desktop, especially if you have kids in your classroom using laptops or Chromebooks and they need to split the screen to see two documents at once, Tab Resize, if you add that, has automatic settings that'll split the screen into 2, into 4, vertically, horizontally. So instead of you having to drag things to the right size, it does all the work for you. So those are the 3 tools I'm going to recommend before we get started today. So once again, look up CheckMark, Grammarly, and Tab Resize as extensions to your Chrome browser.
All right. So Jared and I have definitely both been feeling the teacher burnout. We are not the only ones feeling the burnout. And so we are struggling with desire to get stuff done, motivation, stress, just to get our everyday jobs done. And so we want to always be our very best for students, and we still have to do the work, but the struggle has definitely been real. So we've been looking at different things, and Jared ran across an article that really hit its mark for both of us. So I'm going to kind of let him go ahead and get started with the article.
So the article, I was on LinkedIn and I saw another teacher post this article, and it's called I Quit, Teachers Go Public with Their Resignation Letters by Brenda Isavoli. I hope I didn't butcher that name. Mm-hmm. And we've got a link in the show notes to the article if you'd like to read it in its completeness. We're just going to kind of respond to some of the premises in that article. And basically that article, instead of looking at the usual reasons people think that teachers quit, they actually did some research and collected some letters that teachers teachers had posted publicly declaring why lately they have been leaving the profession. And the old standby excuse is, well, the students, they quit because they don't like the students are difficult, and the other is that the money is bad. Well, it turns out that's not why teachers are leaving the profession anymore. Yeah, the money may be bad. And sure, students are always going to be difficult, but that's part of our job, and we love those kids. It's why we do it. So it's not the students that are driving teachers away, and it's not pay. We knew what we were getting into ahead of time. So what is it that is causing teachers to say, I quit and leave the profession?
Well, the article states, and I'm quoting, that teachers are leaving largely because of oppressive policies and practices are affecting their working conditions and beliefs about themselves and education. And so teachers have basically just said enough is enough, and it's causing walkouts. The article also goes...
Hang on, before you move on from that quote, let's analyze something that's said here. So teachers are leaving largely because of oppressive policies, and those policies and practices are affecting not just working conditions, but beliefs about themselves as teachers and educators and education in general. I think this is what has hit the most home for me, is that I went into education with a belief system about what I do.
Right.
And I think that's starting to be undermined by policies and practices that are starting to proliferate everywhere. No matter where you go, you're seeing a push for certain policies and practices that almost make you question whether education is the primary goal anymore.
Well, and I was about to say the same thing, that it causes you to question, not only is education the goal, but it makes you question yourself as a teacher. And are you doing the right thing? And is this what's really best for my students? Because I didn't go into education to have a student come in and not care about them. I went into education because I wanted to make a difference and to help a student.
You went in for the right reason. So I think it's just interesting the way that that's put. The oppressive policies and practices begin to undercut and attack our beliefs about ourselves. And part of that is evaluations, which we're going to talk about in a minute, but I'm going to let you read the next quote. But the fact that there's that you can work really hard and be good at what you do and ultimately feel as though you're not adding value to the school or a student's life based on an outside person's opinion of you who watched you one time. But we'll get into that.
Right. All right. So it says teachers have had enough, which is what's causing walkouts. And so one of the complaints, and this is a quote from the article, is that scripted lessons, an oppressive testing culture, and a punitive evaluation system are the main reasons why teachers are heading for the exits. So let's dig in. Yeah, let's dig in.
We're going to start with evaluation. So
okay.
What do you want to say about that, Ms. Wall?
Well, evaluations are so subjective. And I feel like I can give a completely different perspective than anyone else than you can, I should say, not anyone else, because I teach a skills-based course. So when you look at the rubric, it doesn't always allow for or it doesn't allow for any gray area. My class is very black and white. There's no gray area in my class. So either they can perform the skill and they can make it happen, or they can't. And so on my case, it's very subjective. But just start off with, it's just a snapshot. It's just a snapshot with that particular group of students, that particular day. That's not what goes on in my class every day, every class period. You know your students. You have a class where these students rock. They're going to ask questions. They're outgoing. They're going to talk to each other. They're going to help each other. They're going to do what they do. And then you've got that class where, you know, it's like pulling teeth to get them to even respond to a question. And you work. And sometimes if someone's in my room doing an evaluation, I have a student who steps up who never steps up, but it wasn't enough. But they don't know what it took for that student and what milestone this was that was taking place in my class, because this is the only time they've darkened my doorway.
And I think I would agree with you that it's not fair for a teacher to be evaluated on such a small window of viewing that class. The other thing that really gets on my nerves about evaluations is that evaluations call for what the state believes is good teaching, which if you look at it in a class like mine, it is good teaching for students to be questioning, for students to lead instruction, for it needs to be student driven. Mm-hmm. That's what education is, when a student is active and passionate and driving their own education. But when you take that evaluation and you lay it over the top of the standardized test push, it doesn't work, because those students don't care if they're meeting this objective or that objective. They just know they're passionate about certain things. They want to learn certain things. And to teach a test is not the same as what that evaluation is looking for. And so it almost becomes a circus to try and pull off what the evaluation wants, while at the same time appeasing an administration that has a really hard push for you to teach a test that's coming up for school points. I know that's a bigger issue we're going to get into, but for me, it's that the evaluation wants something good, and the system is completely skewed in another direction as far as my daily, what I'm doing every day with my curriculum. And so I've got to thwart one or the other. I have to either be working against what's good protocol for the evaluation and then putting on a show twice a year for the evaluation, or I have to say, I don't believe, and I'm not going to do what my administrators are pushing in regards to testing and teaching this test, which is apparently the most important thing, rather than student actual education. And so that I can blow away this evaluation and do what seems like good practice, despite what I'm being asked to do otherwise. So it causes a lot of stress for a teacher who wants to do the right thing and is not one who typically, I'm very much a professional, and I want to do what an administrator is expecting of me. Mm-hmm. And I've never been one to push back and rebel. Like, if I need to be on time, I'm always on time. Dress code, I'm dressed appropriately. You want this in my classroom, I'm going to do my best to do what I can. But it's almost at the point where these evaluations are not fair to teachers because of these dueling ideas and pulls on a teacher's time in their classroom. And it's difficult. And then to teach your heart out and then go sit down and have an administrator say, I looked at you for 50 minutes today, didn't even have time to stay to the end. I was a little late coming in, but based on what I saw, out of 4, which would be highly effective, you're a solid 3. You're just, you're effective. And then to know that now my SLTs and this score are going to determine whether or not I'm an effective teacher. And who knows about those SLTs, because I didn't make them. They were given to me. And I'm struggling against all of this. And it becomes a real pressure cooker for a teacher to just try to do what they want to do, which is love kids and do what's in a student's best interest so that they become lifelong learners, and yet have all this pressure going on.
Right. And with an evaluation, to score perfect 4s across the board in every section of that rubric, teachers who have announced observations, and so you know they're coming, you've prepared and all this, I know I never put on a show. I just do what I do. And this is what we do every day. This is what works. I have years of experience and proof to back up this is what works for my class. And I've always scored very well on my rubric and everything. But I do know of teachers who put on the show, and you can't really blame them. But that's not what happens. A 4 across the board does not happen in everyone's class every single day. And you don't get that Webb's depth of knowledge, your DOK level 4 stuff without going through levels 1, 2, and 3 first. And administrators do not see that. And then, like you said, when you go and then they're like, well, they always build you up first. This was really great. And then they're going to slap you with what they thought was wrong. Do they teach your content? Have they ever taught your content? Do they sit in your classroom? Do they know your kids like you do? No, they don't see how far that you've made it with these kids and so forth. And what kind of teachers were they? That's my question, and so they're trying to be an expert about something they know nothing about. And especially with my content, being computers and stuff, we're like digging into all these Microsoft programs and everything. And they sit there and they're like, oh man, I need to come back to your class so I can learn this stuff. But that's not good enough. No matter what you do, it's never going to be good enough. And
folks, I just want to, I have a fantastic wife who is an excellent teacher. And when she says things like, I know what works in my classroom and I do it, I don't want you to hear her saying, I have a rote thing that I always do and I'm never going to change.
No.
I'm talking about a lady who always looks for a new way to do things, a new way. She's always using new tools. She's always trying new things, asking new questions. And when it works, she sticks with it. When it doesn't, she finds something new or she makes it better. What she's talking about is she's the expert in her field. So it's kind of infuriating to have somebody who has no idea what your content is,
right,
then judge you on how well you teach your content. And is her point. And I totally agree with that. I understand the administrator's life is a struggle because you have to try and become a jack of all trades as an administrator. If you're going to observe an entire school, you better know something about good teaching. But you do have to know content, because
right,
what works in English is not going to work to teach. If you're teaching Excel and kids have to pass a certification test and they better know what this button does and this button does. Well, in English, I don't have to know what this button does and that
right,
button does. I'm asking kids to think critically. And there's some things that are we have to drill, but mostly it's a completely different mindset. So to think that rubric is going to work for you, I understand where you're coming from.
Right.
So that's evaluations.
Yeah, we could continue this later, but yeah.
Another complaint we have, scripted lessons, or what I like to call it, curricular mandates. Again, from the same people who may not teach your content or even know what is required to teach your content or what kids need to know. And yet we're starting to get a much less control over our curriculum. And they say, well, your curriculum, how you teach is up to you, but we expect you to teach this. So, you may be given My Perspectives workbook that has all the texts already. And so there's no choice for the teacher. And one of the things that really gets on my nerves is to go to a PLC or a PD meeting and have somebody tell me how if I want to be evaluated well, student choice, they got to see student choice. Students learn best when they have choice. They can make their own decisions. And yet for some reason, we like to rip that away from teachers and say,
mm-hmm,
we need you to teach this.
Right.
We need you to teach it this way. And, okay, we'll give you 5 strategies to choose from, but you've still limited my choices.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll give you, 3 texts you can choose here to choose for the kids. Okay, but you still limited my choices. So I think it's another thing that causes burnout is, as a professional, I went to school. I was trained. I have 3 postgraduate degrees,
mm-hmm,
and yet I'm treated as if I'm a new teacher every time I go to a meeting. And a lot of that has to do with there's always somebody selling a book, who knows better than me, or selling a curriculum that at some point I don't even know that they're going to need me to have any say in the curriculum. And that is another stress that's put on.
Well, and I have worked at different places, and it's been the exact opposite as well, where, I'm going to give you these classes, I'm going to give you these 4 different grade levels, and yeah, just do something with them. Oh, okay. So hold on. So then you think, I get to come up with my own curriculum. Well, that is also very stressful. And so I like to go into a place and have something to kind of base. I mean, like I said, we're on complete opposite spectrums here, but to kind of have something where I can base something off of, especially considering that my students are working for certification exams. I need that material. I need those resources. And so I've kind of had the opposite to be also true. And, when we talk about student choice or teacher choice, like you said, you're still, you can have one of these 5 things or one of these 3 things. So you're still limiting the options. And the same thing goes with student choice. Teachers do it to them all the time. So yeah, I'm going to give you student choice within these certain parameters. And so but
I think you would also agree, you're running into the idea of a scripted lesson in a curriculum mandate, where you're running up against, instead of your curriculum, in order to help students pass standardized tests, you're having portions of your class mandated to you, taking time away from your content. Yes. Whether it be me in an English class being told, you got to focus on ACT today. We know you teach English, and that's not, there is no course called ACT prep, but we're going to use a portion of your class for that, or we're going to use a portion of your class, which is IBCA, for reading instruction and writing instruction and ACT prep. And before you know it, you're doing more test teaching than you are your actual content teaching.
You're right.
As well.
So 3 times a week, I have a loss of instructional time, or time that my students could be working on things that pertain to my content and that prepares them for what we're doing in certification exams and practicing for other things that don't pertain to my class. And one of the things that we have to do, like you said, is that testing. Kids are a test score. We're going to talk more about that in just a moment.
And let me stop your thought there and just say, not only do they take from your time, but they add to the stress by saying, by the way, I expect you to hit your SLTs because so many of your kids got to get certifications.
Absolutely.
But we're going to steal time from you in order to make that and make this other stuff happen. But nothing is done on the other end with the expectations of your SLT.
I'm not relieved of any kind of duty because I've had to pick up all these other things.
Right.
And so now I'm having to devote my class time and take away from my students so that they can practice on ACT work keys. Well, then I found out this week, and I'm looking for it soon to happen, that we're going to increase the amount of time. So there's that. I also have to give writing assignments once a week. For what? That's my big question. So that's something else, and that too takes away from my class. Now, I have a rubric that they're supposed to follow, but if I haven't taught them this, then why should I grade them on this? Then another thing that's taken away is, and this is in all classes across the curriculum, that students have SSR. Now, that's the silent sustained reading. Now, I love SSR because I enjoy reading, but again, it's taking time away from my class and my content of things that I need to get done.
You're right. So that's evaluations and scripted lessons or curricular mandates. And then we have another item here, standardized test. And I think a lot of teachers can feel our pain here. So standardized test, what I want to say about it is, and we'll get into the data-driven madness here before long, but standardized test, standardization means to make everybody the same. Standards and standardization are not the same thing, despite what you think or what you're taught regularly when you go to a PLC meeting. Standards are an expectation that people are held to. Standardization means to make everybody the same. Mm-hmm. It should not be our goal in school to make everybody the same. And we all know, because if you have a child of your own, you've lived your own life, you see these kids every day, then every person is as unique as their fingerprint, their personality is different. You cannot judge a student based on ability to take standardized tests. And I have kids who will tell you, and they'll make an A in my class, but they won't do well on a standardized test because they get stressed. They get that test anxiety, and they just don't perform well on a standardized test. And then somehow that becomes the measure of a student worth. Not the life lived, not the effort given, not the knowledge gained or the work they're putting in, but it all boils down to a standardized test score. And that is what is paramount to a school. I never thought I'd say that because I've taught a lot of places, and there's always been standardized tests, but I've never worried about standardized tests until I had it all quantified for me into basically a bunch of formulas where student names are not even pulled anymore. It's just, here's how many you teach, here's how many points you better produce, and that is what a student life is worth. That's how it comes across when you go to these meetings, and that is so deflating. But I think that's what I want to say about standardized tests before we get into data-driven madness.
Right. And just a thought for everyone listening. When is the last time that you've been in a meeting and student names were brought up? Like individually, a student, here's Johnny, here's Rebecca, here's, whoever. It doesn't happen. The only time you hear students' name in meetings or just in general conversation is usually to tell you something negative.
Or to attach a score to their name.
To attach a score or a tier rating to that student. And it becomes a student. No, they're a student, but they're a person first. And right. We should call those students by names. They're worth having their name mentioned instead of just a number and a score.
And so our next item after standardized test is micromanagement. And this seems to be a trend in education as well, with the increased responsibility and the increased paperwork and the increased data tracking comes micromanagement, which means, people in your room analyzing how you are collecting your data, analyzing the forms you use with your student. You have to double check your test to make sure it is aligned with standards. Is your lesson plan aligned with those standards? Are your objectives written properly? Are you, just the litany? Are you in every meeting 5 minutes early and on time? Are you, everything is micromanaged to the point where you almost feel like you're not a professional anymore. You're a child who needs to be attended to at all times rather than a professional adult doing a job. And
at times there's also the feeling of, well, obviously I don't do it well enough that you're going to critique me on every little grade that I put in, the point value. I know of teachers who have been micromanaged to the point that someone has came to them and said, I need you to change the point value on this or change the name of this. I don't like that. Well, that teacher runs that classroom. That teacher assigns the value of that assignment and so forth. I could name off 1,000 things with micromanagement. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable. And
the last bullet point, because we know we're running long today and we're just kind of winging this other than some points here. Our last one is data-driven madness. Don't know how many of you, it's almost like March Madness, but it's all year long. Yeah. For some of you, it's my great hope for some of you that, unlike me, you're on a full year term. Kids don't take standardized tests but once a year, and you only get the madness every once in a while. I'm working right now on a schedule that is called accelerated block, which means I get hit with the madness nonstop all year. It's almost like a fever, data-driven madness. And so because technology makes tracking data so easy, and we love technology, and it does make tracking data easier, but it puts that much more demand on the teacher and gives them another chore. There are schools with data specialists whose whole job it is to collect data, to analyze that data, give feedback to the teacher so the teacher can use it to make decisions. But it seems to me the push now is for teachers not only to be experts in their the ability to teach and the lessons they give, their lesson plans. They need to be experts on student engagement, and they need to be experts on their content. And now we need to be experts on data. How to collect it, how to make sense of it, how to organize it, how to give it back to the kids so that the kids can make sense of it and use it in their own study. And it's a lot to ask of one person in a classroom.
On top of everything else you have to do.
And it's this data-driven madness that I'm calling it that has led to the increase in seeing students as just numbers rather than students. Because at the end of the day, and you can't blame an administrator. You can if you want to, but you have to understand the position of administrator. They're getting a school score. At some point at the end of a year, the state's going to come back and say your score is a C or a D or an A or a B. Nobody wants a failing school.
Right.
Nobody wants to be a C when they could be a B, or nobody wants to be a B when they could be an A. But when students become numbers and they become nothing more than what their number is worth to you, and that's all that really matters, then to me you have a problem. And so what we've got is, I don't know if you're listening and you don't live in Louisiana, part of the way you earn points, we call it a school performance score, and you got to hit a certain point total, and that equals a percentage that gives you a grade. Well, anyway, students earn points based on how well they do on standardized tests, whether that be the ACT work keys, whether that be LEAP, end of course test for English and math, certain subjects. They earn points for their certifications and IBCA, BCA. So if you teach a class where they can be quantified into numbers, get ready, because you're about to spend a whole lot of time not only trying to quantify the numbers that go along with each student, but you got to break them into tiers so you can figure out how much numbers they're worth so that you can squeeze every point possible out of that student, and hopefully even move them to another tier so you can squeeze even more points, and to the point where you can go into a PLC room now and there's a chart on the wall that says, as an English teacher, here's what we expect you to produce today. And it's got a point total on the wall. And so if I hit that, then I'm an effective teacher. And if I don't hit that, I'm not an effective teacher. And that's a lot of pressure on a teacher, number one. But then to think that as I look across the room at my students, it's not their best interest I have in mind. It's not lifelong learning or loving them through whatever problem they might be having that day. It's, I got to crack this whip, because you have got to earn a score on this standardized test so that this school can get enough points to be whatever letter grade it is that administration has set for a goal. And as long as we can do that, we can all go home happy. And I think that's part of what drives my disillusionment and burnout at this point, that if I'm going to see things from that perspective, then education is not what I got into, which is making a difference and, teaching a kid how to read, teaching a kid how to think critically so that later in life they can be successful, do what they need to do. It becomes, what did you do for me today?
Right.
And once you hit that score, move to the side. I got to focus on somebody else's score. Once they hit it, move aside. And I don't like that trend in education is where I'm at.
No, and that's the data tracking side of things. And not only that, but some people don't know how to interpret the data. And that's something that you have to look at. And one of the things that I'm having to interpret at the moment on something, there's so many different factors that could go into this particular score that it doesn't make any sense, or it's not valuable to me because of so many different factors. But, as teachers, not only are you tracking the data, you have to track any kind of accommodations, any kind of contact with parents. You can't just make a phone call. You can't just do this. And you have to record every single thing. And it's a lot. And I really can't add to anything that you just said. One of the things that stood out to me in the article that kind of sparked this whole conversation is that there was a 40-year-old veteran teacher, and he cites many reasons for leaving and his exit and everything. And he says, it's about, and he calls it data-driven education. And he says that it seeks only conformity, standardization, testing, and zombie-like adherence to a shallow and generic common core. And when I read that, the whole zombie-like thing, you're just going through the motions because, like you said, what can you do for me today? What kind of point value is placed on you? And it's sad. And like you said, this is not why I became a teacher. And so all of these things that we've talked about, it just continues to just weigh on us. And these are the things that are causing the teacher burnout, which is where not only us, but I mean, I have lots of teacher friends, and, not just at my current place of employment, other places, same thing. And I just know of so many teachers that feel the same way and kind of just on the burnout. And I know it's also that time of the year and, you're midway through and all of this, but it's also the time of year when you should kind of be refreshed because we had the break. We're kind of shifting gears and looking for the second half of the school year. But it's been hard. It really has.
Some will ask, why are you focused on this and what are you going to do about it? And so I just want to say, one of the reasons we're doing this episode, I feel like we owe it to not only our students and our educator peers, our coworkers, but we owe it to education, the system itself, to push against what we see as the direction we don't want to go. If we're going to do anything to combat this, we can't just sit back and say, well, we're going that direction. What else can we do? We need voices crying in the wilderness, pulling education back the other direction. And hopefully you feel like us, and we don't want to leave you thinking there's absolutely nothing can be done. Sure, there's something that can be done. It's my classroom. So I can always talk about on a podcast like this, if you're willing to listen, what education should be. I'm reading right now about what is called open source education and some positive ideas about what education could be and what it should be. And, some of the things I'm reading, like, do GPA and standardized test scores correlate to success later in life? Emphatically, the research says, no. Are you nuts?
It's been very interesting.
The past few presidents, political leaders, CEOs of companies were C students, college dropouts, high school dropouts. These people are all just extra successful in life because they didn't conform. They didn't standardize because they could see the world in their own way and make something out of it. And even read where Bill Gates said he was never at the top of his class. He dropped out of college 2 years in. Bill Gates is worth $96 billion. Right. And one of his quotes, and I'm paraphrasing, is that I was never at the top of my class, but the people who graduated at the top of their class worked for me. So, I'm trying to get across to teachers and to students that your self-worth is not bound up in a standardized test score. As a matter of fact, it's a terrible predictor of future success. Not only that, but open source education is the idea that you're going to learn what you're passionate about. And if we make it open source, if we let you choose the passions you have and you're going to be interested in that. You're going to go look things up. You're going to study them. You're going to learn them because they mean something to you, not because somebody said you need a test score.
Right.
And I think one of the disconnects we see and why kids, we can't be alone. Kids get to high school, they're reading at a elementary and lower middle school level. They're not reading well. They don't have a grasp of basic math. They're struggling to do what they should on grade level. And why? They've had year after year after year in this system, and it's because what do they need to know it for? Are we even connecting on a level where a kid says, this means something to me because I'm going to do this with it, or I need it for this in my life? And I think we've removed that. We've taken that away from kids and just said, look, the reason you need it is because you got a LEAP test coming up. Well, the LEAP test is going to come and go. and school is what, 12, 13 years of their life. Then they have what, 60, 70 years to live, and they're going to look back at the end of a life and say, what about those LEAP scores? Nothing. They're going to say, what did I do with my life? And we got to find a way to make education relevant so that, and I'm telling my kids now, I can't give you an education. You have to take an education. You have to want it and get it for yourself. And I think those of us who actually are passionate about learning, we know that that's the truth. We can sit in a class and be bored all day long, but you give us something we're interested in. We're at home reading about it on our own. We're studying it. Nobody has to give us a test. We're going to learn this. We're like sharing the gospel of the thing we're interested in. We're out telling everybody about it. Oh my God, look what I read today and think about this. And that's not because we're sitting in a class. It's because we love it. Why do we do wall-to-wall podcasts? Why do we do Wall Ed Tech? Because I love technology. Why do I study the latest tool and what can I do with this? Because I love education. I love technology. So I spend my spare time there, not because somebody stuck me in a class and said, oh, you got a test score coming up. It's because it's what I want to do. So I think it's important that we have something to say back in the face of data madness and evaluations. We need to be the cheerleaders for our students, that there is something important about getting an education and that they have to get it. They need to take that education that's being offered to them. And I don't have it all worked out, but it's nice to talk about and get it off your chest and think about what we can do as a education community to stop the burnout and bring the passion back for teachers.
Well, and most teachers feel, and I'm going to say it, I love teaching. I love my students and I love my content. And that's why I'm there. All the other stuff is the stuff that causes the burnout. Absolutely. It's not my kids. I have an amazing group of kids. That's not it at all, because I love my kids. Like I said, I love to teach. When I was a little girl, I used to come home in the afternoon. I'd line up all my stuffed animals on my bed and I'd teach them everything I learned at school that day. I loved school and I loved teaching, and I always knew I was going to be a teacher. And it's something that I too am passionate about. Of course, the technology side, of course, I get to teach computers, so that makes it even better. So I love my content. I love my kids, and I love teaching. And I don't want to be where I am right now, in a sense of I'm burnout and my feelings toward things. And so I know there's lots of other people feel the same way. I know how passionate you are about English, and because we work at a one-to-one school and using the technology. So that's just icing on the cake for you, in literature and stuff like that. And teaching, that's something that you're passionate about. But I think any teacher will tell you it's not the kids, it's not the content, and it's not teaching. It's all the other stuff, because you don't go into teaching for the money, for all these things. You go because it's something that you're passionate about.
And if we have any administrators listening, I don't know that we have a single principal, assistant principal, superintendent that's ever darkened the door of Wall-to-Wall podcast. But if you do, and I'm interested in being I always thought I was interested in being an administrator, but when I talk about the way it's going and what administrators are bogged down in, it doesn't seem all that appealing. But if I was going to interview for a job, or if I was going to give some advice to an administrator as a teacher, and I think that's what's unique about Wall-to-Wall podcast, we are not administrator. We're not the tech people at your school who don't have to deal with teaching. They're just there to, they're just happy. Hey, it's all computers. Let's talk about it. We love the computers, but we're bogged down in the content just like regular teachers, because we're regular teachers too.
And we're dealing with the kids, all the behaviors,
but
all these other things. But if I had
to give some advice to administrators, it would be, you hired good people. Trust your judgment. You didn't hire somebody and think, boy, they stink. I got to really deal with those people. No, you hired quality people, professionals, and you thought they were good at what they did. Well, we all went to school. We all are passionate. Most of us, we know there's some duds, but you need to treat us like the adults that we are. And at the bare minimum, treat us as a professional. Kindness is a currency that is lost. Some kindness, some, a little bit of professional courtesy. Assume the best rather than the worst. And I think just creating a culture where students are valued and teachers are valued rather than a test score would go a long way to alleviate some burnout, change a culture. And I think you'd be shocked at how test scores go up. When people feel valued, they actually do the things. You don't have to crack a whip to get them done. People want to get them done because they want to, if I love where I work, I want that place to function, peak efficiency. I'm proud of it. I want to be here. I want it to be something. Man, if I'm burnt out, micromanaged, and miserable, I just want to go home. Man, I just need to get out of here. Nothing. It's not helping test scores. If the test scores improve, it's almost like when you watch those guys in the movies where they got the slaves below deck and they're rowing those boats and the guys are cracking the whips. Yes. It's like, if you just give them a break, let them eat something, maybe get a drink, you get a little more productivity out of these fellas rowing this boat, not cracking the whip. And they're saying, hey, look, we don't care if you starve to death and we throw you over. We need you to keep rowing. No, that's not. This is like, it's not.
That's a very good example.
This is not what we need.
I like it.
And so that's my thoughts on the I Quit Teacher Burnout episode. And don't want anybody to think that there's not hope. There is hope, but it comes down to each and every one of us, speaking truth.
This was a completely different podcast for us, but
it was nice to bare my soul today.
It was. So don't forget about us on the Flip Grid because we want to hear from you. You don't even have to leave us a name if you don't want to, and because we will not use your name or anything.
Or your likeness. We'll keep it audio only.
Right. So
we can even put a filter on it if you want to change your voice.
Yeah. So completely different, but I liked it. And like I said, we just kind of decided to wing it and just have an honest conversation.
So to all our teachers who take the time to listen, you may not hear it anywhere else. I tell my kids this every day. You may not have heard it at home today. You may not have heard it from your administration today. We love you. We thank you for all that you do for the children that you teach, because we know you don't do it for the money. And we know you don't do it for the pat on the back or the evaluation score or the test score. You do it because you love those kiddos. And so we love you and hope you'll keep listening. And next time we'll try to bring you some more technology to help you out with your classroom.
Thank you for listening to Wall to Wall Podcast. You can get all of our podcasts by subscribing to Wall to Wall Podcast on iTunes. For more resources, visit walledtech.com. You can follow us on Twitter or find us on Facebook. Just search for Wall Ed Tech. If you have questions, comments, or things you want us to talk about, visit Wall Ed Tech and send us an email, tweet, or message us on Facebook. We look forward to hearing from you.